Like many books I discuss here on my channel, Love and Respect is a book about relationships which has many kernels of truth at its base. It opens with the statement, "You may remember the Beatles song, 'All You Need Is Love.'" I absolutely disagree with this conclusion. 5 out of 10 marriages today are ending in divorce because love alone is not enough. And I have to say, I thoroughly agree. This sounds like a solid foundation for a book. For a relationship to work long term, each couple needs different things, but ultimately they do need more than love. You need mutual respect, to listen to each other, to communicate effectively, to share core values, to share life goals, and so on. This sounds like a solid foundation for a book, but Emerson Eggerichs, who wrote this book, goes another way. He believes relationships need something else, something which is overly simplistic and which ultimately can be used as a tool against vulnerable people. He thinks all relationships need love and respect, but these don't need to be mutual. According to him, the wife needs to sometimes feel loved by her husband, whereas the husband always needs to be respected by his wife, unconditionally. There are many problems with this, obviously. It's overly simplistic, it can be quite misogynistic, it's heteronormative in that it completely ignores same-sex couples, trans individuals, non-binary individuals, people in polyamorous relationships, people in asexual relationships, and so on. There's a whole host of other kinds of people and lifestyles and things that it completely ignores, but I would say one of the worst parts is that it's dangerous, especially to women, as we're going to see in this video. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. Now, this book does have a biblical foundation, and while organisations like Focus on the Family, who you may recognise from these videos, have endorsed and promoted this book, there are also a number of more sensible and compassionate Christians who thoroughly hate it. I found a couple of reviews in particular that were particularly revealing. This is a blog from a Christian woman called The Imperfect Homemaker who writes about, and I quote, "cultivating a Christ-centered home." Obviously, I'm not her target audience, but I thoroughly respected and agreed with her evaluation of this book and found her insight absolutely invaluable. If you're okay with it, I'd like to read you a little lengthy extract of one of her blog posts reviewing this book. The full thing is going to be linked in the video description though. As someone who works with Christian women escaping domestic abuse, I can tell you that if you ask around amongst these women, you will learn that the book, Love and Respect, was their abuser's playground. An abusive man uses the term respect as a weapon to control his wife. Anytime she refuses his unreasonable demands, he claims that he does not feel respected by her, and that's why he acts unloving to her. He holds basic kindness hostage, knowing she will strive to meet every demand in order to feel loved. And when she does not receive love from her husband, she believes it's her fault because she failed to make him feel respected. Instead of realizing that this form of coercive control is abuse, she believes from the book that she can help him be more loving to her by doing whatever it is he says makes him feel respected. She does not realize that there will be no end to his demands. There's nothing in the Love and Respect book that explains to a woman that this dynamic is abusive. Any offhand disclaimer that a woman experiencing abuse should seek help is of no value because virtually all abuse victims do not even realize what they're experiencing is abuse, and that is key. Remember that, we'll come back to it later. This is especially true if the abuse is perpetuated without physical violence, but instead by using a godly wife's tender heart against her by making her feel that she is to blame because she somehow failed as a wife. The Imperfect Homemaker then goes on to say that so horrific was the abuse perpetuated in the name of this book that the author of this post knew a woman who tried to then contact places like Focus on the Family to let them know the damage this book was causing and caution them against recommending it. The blog says that she wanted to make them aware of the hundreds of women who had told their stories of having love and respect weaponized against them by abusive husbands, but Focus on the Family completely ignored her. So she tried again. She contacted them again, to which Focus on the Family finally responded and accused her of, I quote, running a concerted campaign against the book, and said she was at fault for having misread and misjudged the book. Absolutely disgusting. So not only is Focus on the Family homophobic and transphobic, as we saw in my last video on them, but they're absolutely okay with promoting domestic violence and abuse against women. Coolsies. Another Christian blog wrote about this book and summarised the main problem with it incredibly well. I do believe that if you're in a good marriage with two well-meaning people, the main message you'll take away is don't be selfish, which is beneficial. I think that's why so many people like the book and have gleaned a lot from it. But if one partner is not well-meaning, the advice can make their marriage worse. Beyond that, the underlying premise of a book can change our expectations and our conversations about marriage. The author then goes on to say, I see this in marriage books quite a bit. The book will say something like, now of course if you're being abused, please remove yourself from the situation and call the police. Love and Respect even does that. I think just about every book I've read does that, but here's the problem. You can't give that caveat, but then at the same time give anecdotes of people who are obviously in that situation, but not label those things as abusive. And that is exactly the problem I have with so many of these books, and not just non-fiction, but fiction as well. So many books portray abuse as love, romance, passion. They don't label it as abusive, and then wonder why people stay in abusive relationships. When I reviewed the Harrow Affair books, for example, in which a clearly abusive relationship, complete with a number of rape scenes, is portrayed as romantic, true love, and it ends in marriage, I had so many people reach out to me say, but it's just fiction. It's different in real life. I'd never been in an abusive relationship. I'd recognise the signs of abuse in real life. This would never happen to me. And it's heartbreaking because I would have once said the same things. Oh, I'm strong, I'm independent, I'm smart, I won't be in an abusive relationship. I'd recognise the signs of abuse. If a man ever hurt me, of course I'd leave him. But once you're there in the relationship, it's very hard to recognise. You do stay. You don't realise it's abuse. And when you're told it's your fault, and you internalise the blame for it, you think you're the one who has to change and not the abuser. And books like this make that mindset worse. They make it harder for people to recognise the abuse and to leave the abusive situations. You're okay, gorgeous. You're protecting me. You're a good girl. This one always knows when I'm covering difficult topics. She's here for me, aren't you? My little protector. My little support pup. Yes. I love you. I love you. It's exactly the same with these books. Love and Respect, Girl Defines books, anything by Michael and Debbie Pearl, like Create to Be as Help Me or Preparing to Be as Help Me, and countless other books I've reviewed on this channel over the past, 5-6 years, something like that. Usually all these relationships books say something like, and oh, by the way, get out if it's abusive. But then they never teach people to recognise what abuse is. Abuse isn't just a person hitting you. Abuse can also be controlling behaviour, emotional manipulation, gaslighting, withholding money, and so many other things. You right there? You trapped in my cardigan. Wanna go that way? You silly bee. Good girl. You know how to lighten the mood, don't you, in a serious situation? Yes. It's okay. I got you. But abuse can absolutely be so many other things that these women are just told to put up with in books like Love and Respect. These things that are just seen as natural because of gender roles, but are actually abusive and do actually put women in danger. In Debbie Pearl's books, for example, and I've got quite a few videos on these, I read stories of how her husband, on their wedding night, he had sex with her for the first time so roughly that she was sore and bleeding. She then got no sleep, and first thing the next morning, even before the sun was up, he dragged her onto a beach with no shoes to pick him food for breakfast. She ended up with bleeding feet, barely able to walk. She then had to cook him breakfast, and then he had sex with her again roughly before she'd even had a chance to clean or bandage off her feet. In another story, she tells of how her husband would literally throw and slam around bags of rubbish because he didn't want to have to take them out, and he'd smash things and stuff, and she justifies this as, well, of course he had to react like that because I was nagging him too much. In another, there's a wife who literally throws her husband's computer out of the window and smashes it up, and Debbie justifies this by saying, well, the husband had a porn addiction, what else was the wife supposed to do? In another, a husband threatens his wife with a knife, and Debbie justifies this by asking the person, well, why don't you think about what you did to provoke him? You know, did you make him angry? Could you have been more pleasant to him? What drove him to picking up the knife? These are examples of abuse from both the man and the woman in the relationship that are all justified and normalised and made out to be the victim's fault. You can't sit there and tell stories and justify abusive behaviour, but also tell people, report abuse to the police in the same paragraph and still be taken seriously. So today we are going to be looking deep into this book, Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs, and have a look at what it does well, what it does badly, and why it can be so dangerous, and hopefully raise a little bit of awareness about books like this, so hopefully more women and other victims, because not all victims are women, have the strength and resources to leave abusive relationships themselves. As a survivor of domestic violence and intimate partner abuse myself, this is something that does hit pretty close to home for me, and something that I think is very important to keep talking about. as you might have gathered from this fairly lengthy introduction, this is not an atheist versus Christian argument, even though this is a Christian-focused book. As you've seen from the Imperfect Homemaker's blog, she's a Christian, I'm an atheist. We both agree that this book is harmful. This is about someone writing a book and using religion as a tool to oppress and hurt other people, and that needs talking about. This isn't a, see, all Christians are bad. This is a, see, this book is bad. Emerson claims that the underlying cause of most marriage problems is, the major problem I heard from wives was, he doesn't love me. Wives are made to love, want love, and expect love. Many husbands fail to deliver. But as I kept studying scripture and counselling couples, I finally saw the other half of the equation. Husbands weren't saying it much, but they were thinking, she doesn't respect me. Husbands are made to be respected, want respect, and expect respect. Many wives fail to deliver. That's his premise for this entire book, and to me it's just fundamentally flawed. Respect should be a mutual thing in a couple or partnership or any relationship. How can he not understand that women want and need and deserve to be respected too? And men want and need and deserve to be loved too. And this is before we even touch on the fact that he's completely ignoring same-sex couples and all sorts of other kinds of relationships. You know, it's just, God's sake. To me, you can't really love someone and be in love with someone without respecting them first, surely. So that should be the foundation. Mutual love and respect for, you know, on both sides. Not whatever this crap is of, ooh, big man need respect for him to love. You know, no. Emerson spends the first few chapters of this book talking a lot about his own childhood and his own marriage and his own relationship. And he talks a lot about how his parents divorced twice before he was 5 years old. And why? Well, it's all his mother's fault, apparently, because she had the nerve to get a job and be financially independent like these damn women do. Not even joking. That's what he says caused his parents to break up. His mother had a job. Mum taught acrobatics, tap dance and swimming, which gave her a good income and enabled her to live independently of Dad's resources. Dad was left feeling that Mum could get along fine without him, and she would often send him that message. Because he was offended, he would react to her in unloving ways. He was sure Mum did not respect him. Dad would get angry over certain things, none of which I'm able to recall. Mum's spirit would be crushed, and she would just exit the room. Okay, so what I'm hearing here is that there's an insecure man with anger issues, and this is somehow the woman's fault because she has a job? All the red flags already, seriously. And these just go on when he talks about his own relationship. There are quite a few stories to pick from, many of which I'm like, why are these people even married? Do they even like each other? But he talks about his own relationship, and one that made me particularly uncomfortable was this story. So this is after they'd been married for a few years. A few more years went by, and Sarah's birthday was coming up. She was thinking about how I would respond. Would I even remember? She always remembered birthdays, but birthdays weren't big on my radar screen. So what she did was not done in a mean spirit. She was simply trying to discover things about me and men in general. She knew that forgetfulness was a common problem, and she was just being curious. As an experiment, she hid all the birthday cards that had arrived before her birthday. No hints of her birthday existed anywhere, and I was going along in my usual fog, studying and thinking. On her birthday, I had lunch with a friend. That evening, as Sarah and I had dinner, she softly asked, "So did you and Ray celebrate my birthday today?" I hemmed and hawed, but I couldn't explain forgetting Sarah's birthday. My forgetfulness had been unloving, and I could see that she was hurt. But at the same time, I had these strange feelings. Yes, I'd been wrong to forget, but I hadn't ignored her birthday intentionally. I felt judged, put down, and rightly so. At the time, I couldn't describe my feelings with a word like disrespected. During those years, when feminists were going full blast, men didn't talk about being disrespected by women. Okay, she shouldn't have tested him. I feel like if you have to test each other in a relationship, you already know there's problems there and it's an issue. But she also shouldn't have needed to, you know? He's the one who did the horrible thing here. He's the one who forgot his wife's birthday. Like, they live together, do they not talk? And yeah, sure, he didn't intentionally ignore it, but he was being inconsiderate. He was being unthoughtful, not thoughtful. Thoughtless, that's the word. He was being thoughtless, and because she dared to remind him that it was her birthday, he goes on a rant about feeling disrespected. Like, she didn't do anything wrong here. She shouldn't have tested him, sure, but her saying, "So did you celebrate my birthday with your friend today?" That's not a bad thing, that's not a problem. The fact that he's angry at her and thinks rightly so because she dared remind him it was her birthday. Just, it is ridiculous to me. I cannot deal with this. He then talks about how they each did little things that annoyed each other when they first got married, and how these turned into big arguments. And again, I kind of have to agree with her side of things on this as well. So the little things that he would do that annoyed her was stuff like leaving wet towels on the bed, which I understand because, yeah, that can lead to, like, the bed being damp and smelly. If you leave it too long, things can get mouldy. It can make the bed uncomfortable to sleep in. Things can smell. It's not nice. I get why she'd be upset and annoyed by that. Not enough to cause a full argument, but I get it, you know? The little things she did that he was mad about were, and I quote, "Sarah periodically coughs and clears her throat." Yeah, that's it. That's what caused big arguments. Early on in our marriage, when we would be praying, I would get irritated by her coughing. So, her presence. You're annoyed by her presence, her bodily functions, just her making a noise. It's not really the same to me. Oh, you're doing something which will make our living space uncomfortable. Oh, you're existing. I don't know, maybe this one I'm aware that I'm probably blowing a little out of proportion though, because this is like a personal red flag for me. One of the things that when I was with Johnny, what could just set him off was me clearing my throat. Every time I did it, he would tell me I was being passive aggressive and it would cause a big argument. It could end up in him throwing things and smashing things, and it was horrific. I became very, very self-aware of my throat, my coughs. It made me very self-conscious and very scared to just like make a noise. And if you guys have been watching my channel for a while, you know I have a lot of issues with my tonsils. I get bad tonsillitis like a few times a year and completely lose my voice. And in the aftermath of that, I often have a lot of and having to clear it with my throat and stuff. And so for a long time after Johnny, I was petrified of clearing my throat around people. It made me very uncomfortable, it made my throat hurt a lot. It was just an absolute nightmare. For me, having an issue with your partner, just, you know, having bodily functions, making a noise, making their presence known, that's what the red flag is to me, you know? I tell this story because the fact that Emerson uses the example of like, her clearing her throat annoys me, so she needs to learn to respect me more, is like holding up a mirror to the man who abused me, and it worries me. I do feel sorry for Emerson's wife a lot after reading this book. Anyway, he concludes that when a husband feels disrespected, he has a natural tendency to react in ways that feel unloving to his wife. Perhaps the command to love was given to him precisely for this reason. When a wife feels unloved, she has a natural tendency to react in ways that feel disrespectful to her husband. Perhaps the command to respect was given to her precisely for this reason. And his reasoning is full of stereotypical, outdated ideas about gender. Like, according to him, all women are so insecure, and that results in nagging. Because apparently all women nag, all women are insecure. The wife knows she loves him, but she wonders at times if he loves her nearly as much. So when he comes across as unloving, she typically reacts in a negative way. In her opinion, he needs to change into a more sensitive and caring man. Unfortunately, a wife's approach is to complain and criticize in order to motivate her husband into becoming more loving. He then says something that just feels very alien to me. I often ask husbands, "Does your wife love you?" And they reply, "Yes, of course." But then I ask, "Does she like you?" And the answer usually comes back as, "Nope." This confuses me, how can you possibly love someone but not like them? I've never understood this, not at all. How can you possibly have an ego so big that you're like, oh yeah, I treat her so badly that she doesn't like me, but she loves me so she won't leave me? It's all just very, very bizarre to me. Anyway, apparently because of this, in many cases, the wife's dislike is interpreted by the husband as disrespect and even contempt. So the husband decides he will motivate his wife to become more respectful by acting in unloving ways. Again, it's just all very bizarre. Also at this point, sorry if you can hear Kyra, she's snoozing next to me, she's snoring quite a bit. It echoes around the house. I've got the mic pointed away from her, but you know what it is. Small flat, things echo. I can't exactly kick her outside because, you know, it's the middle of winter. I'm not gonna put her outside in the cold in winter, you know, so sorry if you can hear her, but, you know, she has to live. Emerson then goes on to say, the husband must love his wife as he loves himself. The wife must respect her husband. In addition, the Greek word Paul uses for love in this verse is agape, meaning unconditional love, and the wording of the rest of the passage strongly suggests that the husband should receive unconditional respect. But coupled with what he was saying before, what does this actually mean? Apparently, men can feel loved without feeling liked. So is he implying a man doesn't have to like his wife? He just has to act loving towards her? Why is he implying that women don't need to be respected too? And apparently, most men feel their wives love them, so what they're actually asking for is love and respect, whereas women just need to settle for love alone, apparently. But honestly, without all the context, this doesn't sound so bad. It's not completely wrong. It is important to show your partner love. It is important to show your partner respect. It's important to feel love. It's important to feel respected. But his way of segregating arbitrarily by gender and defining those terms the way he does is where the problem arises. On a surface level, this book isn't bad, but when we read the subtext, when we read what's underneath, when we read his actual meaning, that's where the problems arise. And of course, when we see how this book has affected real people. We're going to be reading more testimonies from people who've been affected by this book later, so bear all this in mind when we get to those. Emerson then goes on to quote more scripture, and this is where things start to get a little dangerous. Peter is not calling on wives to feel respect. He is commanding them to show respectful behaviour. This is not about a husband deserving respect. It is about a wife being willing to treat her husband respectfully without condition. So wives aren't supposed to feel respected, okay, that's bad enough, and then they have to treat their husbands respectfully without conditions, whether they deserve it or not. Doesn't matter if the husband's a good person or not, doesn't matter if they treat them well or not. The husbands need to be respected by their wives because they're husbands. Now, I would say in an ideal world, of course, you should respect your husband. Why are you marrying someone if you don't respect them? And every human being, I would say, deserves a basic level of respect, right? These are just normal things. I'm not saying you have to be disrespectful to people. This is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that just because you're married to someone, that does not mean you have to give them respect unconditionally. Sometimes you don't find out until months or even years into a relationship what someone is really like. Abusers don't show themselves straight away. Abusers aren't awful all the time. If they were, they wouldn't have got us hooked on them. They wouldn't have got us to fall for them. They wouldn't keep us coming back. They wouldn't keep us around, would they? This is why you have cycles of abuse and love bombing, abuse and love bombing. This is why many of them, especially narcissistic abusers, keep a number of women on the hook. They keep trying to get them to come back. They're juggling all these different people. They can be nasty to them, love bombing them, and then they switch it round and all this sort of thing. Anyway, my point is, if someone starts treating you badly at any point, if they don't respect you, if they hurt you, if they lie to you, if they cheat on you, if they abuse you, regardless of if you're married to them or not, you do not have to keep showing them respect. You do not, even if you're married to them. I don't know if this is a controversial stance or not, and I understand there's a lot of emotion fueling what I'm about to say, but for me, abusers do not deserve your respect. Give it if you want, but you do not have to. I've seen a lot of stuff where a lot of people say the best way you can move on from someone is to forgive the people who wronged you. But for me, I don't think that's the case with abusers. I've moved on from my abuser, but I don't forgive him at all. I don't forgive him, I don't respect him, I don't like him, and I don't want anything to do with him. I cut him out of my life completely, blocked him, blocked his family, blocked his friends, moved on. I don't even know where he is or what he's doing now, but I don't doubt he's probably in the process of love bombing and abusing someone else or a number of other people. He'll do the whole love bombing and discard, love bombing and discard. He did it for 15, 16 years before he met me. He's not going to stop now. So he's not in my life. He's someone I've cut out completely. He's someone I've moved on from. He's someone I've got a lot of therapy to deal with the stuff that he did to me. But I don't forgive him. I don't like him. I don't respect him. And that's the way it has to be for me to heal and grow within myself. You don't have to forgive people to move on. You can move on and know that, no, I don't forgive you. I still think you're awful, but I'm putting you in my past, and that's okay. Every survivor will have a different way of coping, and however you do it, however works for you, that's all right. If you want to forgive, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine as well. But anyway, that note aside, this idea of unconditional respect and not being supposed to get any respect in return just sounds terrifying to me. Even with my wonderful partner now, right? I love him and I respect him and I care about him so much. But if he changed his behavior to me and did something awful, then my level of respect for him would change too. If he hurt me, for example, I wouldn't respect him anymore. It's that simple. Same as if I did something awful to him, I wouldn't expect him to still respect me in the same way. I think when we say that things like respect and love are conditional, people always take that in the wrong way and they think, oh, well, you know, so-and-so wants you to buy them this and this and this, or they won't love and respect you. So-and-so wants you to give them this and this, or they won't respect you. So-and-so is demanding this in return for this. I don't think that's the case at all. I think the conditions are more along the lines of, I'll respect you as long as you respect me. I'll love you as long as you love me. As long as you treat me well, I'm gonna love and care for you and respect you and show you that every day, you know? That's what conditional means. We earn respect and love by treating other people well, but that's not to say the default is being disrespectful. I think there's a level that people forget about that is just kind of indifference, a middle ground that's not really spoken about. It's not a matter of, oh, if you hurt me, I'm gonna stop being disrespectful to you. It's just, oh, if you hurt me, I'm not gonna outwardly show you this respect and feel it anymore. We're gonna go back to a base of just until you can earn back that respect again. Or sometimes it will drop below that. You know what I mean? It's just, I think it's just a lot more nuanced than a lot of people often talk about. I don't know. Anyway, he doubles down on this in a later chapter where he says, one wife was shocked when she asked her husband, do you want me to tell you that I love you or that I respect you? Without hesitation, he replied, respect. She couldn't believe her ears. She had never realized that though he needed her love, what he lacked was assurance of her respect. And this is weird to me because I think with stories like this, maybe Emerson and everyone in this book just has different definitions of love and respect to what I do, for example. So for me, if I tell someone I love you, whether that's my partner, whether that's Kyra, whether it's one of my friends, that encompasses all of the feelings. That means I really like you as a person. I love spending time with you. I think you're lovely. I respect you. I care about you. I want to be here for you. I care about your well-being. That's what I love you means to me. Love is an all-encompassing of all of that. And without the individual elements, how can you love someone? I don't get how you love someone without respecting them, you know? That said, I do think it's important to be specific with compliments sometimes. You know, I do like to tell people things like, oh, I really appreciate this about you. Oh, thank you for doing this for me. Oh, you're such an inspiration. And things like that. The idea that you can love someone and not respect them, or love them and not like them, is just very, very alien to me. I don't get it at all. The next chapter lists a bunch of examples of real people having marital problems, and it all seems to me like these are problems with communication. They're not communicating with each other, they're not talking, they're communicating in different ways. For example, a man surprises his wife by coming back early from a business trip with the intention to sweep her off her feet and have sex as soon as he gets through the door. But once he gets home, he finds that she is super, super stressed because she's in the middle of a bunch of childcare issues, like there are 4 kids around the house, she has these time-sensitive errands to run, and she's like, oh my god, thank god you're home, can you help me with these please? And then it ends in a big, big argument because he's like, no, I came home for sex. And she's like, but I have all these things to do. And he's like, yeah, but sex. Why are you asking me to look after the kids when sex? Emerson says the problem here is that the husband didn't show his wife enough love before they had sex, and the wife was disrespectful to her husband by ignoring his sexual needs. But no, that's not the problem here at all. The problem is they didn't communicate with each other at all. The problem was he formulated this big plan in his head without communicating it to a wife, and then got mad when she couldn't stick to it because she knew nothing about it. She had all these plans and chores and stuff to do already. They had kids in the house, they had kids to pick up from school, they had doctor's appointments to go to. And when she's like, crap, we have all of this to do, can you help me? He didn't listen to her communicating about how busy she was, how stressed she was, how much she needed help. He just thought, but I want to have sex and she's ruining my plan. I planned this all and she's not sticking to it. This could all have been solved by communicating before any of this happened. Husband, if you're changing your plans when you're going to be home, when you're going to be away, when you're working, tell your wife. If you want some alone time and some romance and some intimacy, talk to your wife, arrange it, set aside a time that works for both of you. Wife, if you've got all these things going on and you need help, ask your husband. Husbands, listen, and maybe offer a bit of help. This all seems like a big communication issue, mostly on the husband's side, but Emerson doesn't see it that way. He puts a lot of the blame for this on the wife for being disrespectful by not attending to his sexual needs as soon as he demanded This idea of couples having real conversations is quite alien to Emerson throughout this entire book. Apparently, why is communication between husbands and wives such a problem? It goes back to the fact that we send each other messages in code based on gender, even though we don't intend to. What I say is not what you hear, and what you think you heard is not what I meant at all. Maybe it's just because I'm autistic, but codes have never worked for me, and gendered codes don't make sense to me at all. I personally find direct communication is the only way I can really deal with things, and I need a partner who's okay with that too. And it makes everything so much easier when you're just very direct about things. There's no disappointments, no misunderstandings or anything. It's very nice. And I think it's important for every couple to learn how to communicate with each other effectively. But I also kind of have to ask, if you can't communicate with each other, if you keep misunderstanding each other, if you both have very different communication styles and neither is willing to compromise, why are you together? If you can't communicate, why get married at all? Couldn't you have found someone to marry that you could communicate with? It's all just very bizarre to me. I don't know. And then Emerson gives examples of how him and his wife never understand each other, and so him asking her if she was listening to the radio resulted in a full-blown argument. It sounds horrible. It really seems like these two just spend their lives at home arguing with each other, and I feel quite bad for them. He then goes on to make some really sexist jokes about women having PMS, and he calls it pre-murder syndrome. I thought we were past this by now, but apparently not. Ha ha ha. Women have hormones. That's funny. Am I right, guys? And then he goes on to address the question. You say women need love and men need respect. Isn't the opposite just as true? Don't gals need respect and guys need love? My answer, of course, is women need respect and guys need love. But I'm talking about the primary drive in each sex. And then to prove his point, he says, you know that song Respect by Aretha Franklin? Otis Redding sang it first, and therefore, men want love far more than respect, and men want respect far more than love. This whole segment is quite laughable to me. He just has such a sad, sad view of the world. Like, in this example, he wants women to think about their sons, and then says, if his marriage is typical, after the first year, he will know his wife loves him, but he will feel like she neither likes him nor admires him for who he is as a human being. If the pattern is like most, she will spend her energy seeking to help change him by her loving criticism and complaints, which eventually feel like contempt to him. How is this a typical marriage? This sounds miserable. If this is a typical marriage, keep marriage the hell away from me, please. But then again, I guess this is what happens when you don't let people really be alone together or properly get to know each other, never mind live together, before they jump into a commitment like a marriage. If you don't see highs and lows together, you don't really know how you deal with it. And suddenly you're married and you're like, oh crap, we don't do well here. This is what happens. The idea that you're miserable after a year of marriage, I'm like, oh God, these poor people. Feel for them, and they're not selling it to me. Then there's a bunch of boring, outdated gender role stuff, like treat your wife well, but no, you're still the head of her and need to provide and you need to lead and she shouldn't be allowed to lead anything and all of that nonsense. We've addressed it all before in many, many, many videos. This whole section is full of lines like, when he feels she's trying to be a bossy queen, he cannot detect her real heart, which just makes my skin crawl. He then goes on to address this concern, which I myself have vocalized in this video. I've encountered many women for whom the words unconditional respect are a red flag. They've been bombarded for so long by the wrong interpretation of biblical submission that they are suspicious and even hostile towards the idea. It'll never work, it's a man's world. Unconditionally respecting men will just give them more power to grind us down. I understand these concerns, but I respond that husbands who have goodwill towards their wives are not looking for ways to have power and superiority over them. Okay, but what about the husbands that don't have goodwill towards their wives? What about the ones who are looking for ways to have power and superiority over them? You're not addressing that, are you? And that's the big problem. When you teach women they should just unconditionally be passive, they should be submissive, you're letting them be vulnerable and open to being taken advantage of, and even the strongest women can fall for it. I did. A while back in a video about the whole hashtag not all men thing, I read out a post which I think used the tick analogy, which is not all ticks carry Lyme disease, but some do, and you can't tell which ones are which. Therefore, it's best to try and avoid them all, right? And if you come across any tick biting you, then you seek medical treatment as soon as you can, right? You can't just sit back and say, well, not all ticks have Lyme disease, so I'm going to roll around in a pit of them and not seek treatment, because you don't know which ones are the dangerous ones, right? Funnily enough, side note here, there's one commenter who really took offense to that and keeps commenting on like every video I made about how apparently I call men parasites and I'm a man-hating bitch and all this stuff. And I'm like, you missed the point completely. I didn't call men parasites. I don't hate men. Anyway, it makes me laugh every time I see their comments. In reality, this tick analogy is something you can apply to all kinds of facets of life and relationships, especially in this case, you know? And everything I say here is gender non-specific. If you're writing a book to help people who are unhappy in relationships, then of course not all of those relationships are going to have an abusive partner in them. But chances are some will. When you're writing for the masses, this is what happens. So when you're talking to all of those people, you don't know which one's being abused and which ones aren't. So when you tell them all, women, you need to be passive. You need to respect him unconditionally. If he's treating you badly, it's because you're doing something wrong. You're putting a portion of the people reading in danger. The ones with abusive partners are gonna be in more danger. And while I'm aware you can't make every single person happy with content, you can't speak to everyone all the time, I think it's important to be aware that there is gonna be a significant portion of your audience who are being abused, who you are speaking to, who you are making things worse for. And you need to be aware of that and try and stop it. If instead of saying, women be submissive, women respect and conduct, all this sort of thing, if instead you said to all people, hey, here's how you identify all kinds of abuse, here's how you communicate, here's how you retain your self-respect and independence while loving and caring for and respecting and looking after someone else, then you're keeping everyone safe. The ones in good relationships and the ones in abusive relationships. Does that make sense? There's a way you can approach this to speak to everyone without putting a percentage of them in danger. Emerson's not doing that. Emerson's approach of, aren't you worried about abusive men? No, because a good man wouldn't do that, is absolutely dangerous and scary and heartless. He comes back to this again later in the book when he writes, as I encourage some wives to use unconditional respect, I can tell they suspect that I'm a chauvinist in sheep's clothing, trying to set them up for a life of subservience. I remind such a wife to be patient. I'm trying to help her get her husband to love her, not run roughshod over her. Okay, but what about the husbands who aren't going to love her more, who are going to take advantage of it, who are going to be abusive? Are the wives of those people just supposed to be patient too? And he makes these assumptions the other way around too. He says, I want to remind all husbands that their wives are basically good-willed women. They're only acting critical, contentious, and disrespectful because they are crying out for love. And yet he says the things that they're criticizing are things like being late, working too much, poor parenting, insensitivity, etc. But apparently these aren't the real problems wives have. They're not really mad about this stuff. They're just feeling unloved, which is crazy to me. I'm like, if I say to someone, hey, I'm upset that you're a bad parent, that doesn't mean, okay, maybe I'll buy you flowers. That means, no, you step up and be a better parent. If I say to someone, hey, I'm annoyed that you're late for every single one of our dates, that means, okay, I'll be on time now, not, oh, but babe, you're so beautiful. It just seems to me that Emerson is taking all these genuine problems and issues and concerns that women have, like being a bad parent, being insensitive, and so on, and just glossing over them and writing them off as, oh, you know, women. They're just all insecure, aren't they? It's so patronising, and I hate it. And then he comes back to things like, practically every woman I've met or counselled would be willing to say, I just want somebody to love me, to make me feel special, to make me the most important one in his life. And then he says the opposite about respect for men, and he quotes some studies and stuff, nothing really academic, just like, oh, I was in a church group once, and then I asked these men and women, and then they all said these things. Like, there's no actual real studies he's done here. He's not quoting any academic papers, nothing like that. He just talks about his personal anecdotes and stuff. But he never, in these studies he does, bothers to actually define the terms love and respect. And I'm wondering if, when he talks about, oh, these men say they want respect, oh, these women say they want love, I'm wondering if maybe the people are wanting the same things, but it's just about how society's standards for different genders define those terms, and how maybe there's a difference there rather than some difference in innate needs like Emerson claims. Does that make sense? I also noticed that in one of the studies he did outright ask women if they wanted or needed to be respected. In many cases the questions were just like really leading. It was just like he'd have a group of 5 women sat around him and be like, how many of you want to feel more loved? yeah. And then he'd go to a group of men and be like, how many of you feel disrespected by your wives? And then he just takes these like random groups of like, oh, this man or these women. He's like, and see, this is what all men and women want. It's biological, it's innate, it's a bit ridiculous. Then there's a bizarre chapter in which Emerson, a man, tells us women how we feel and interact with other women in the most outdated and stereotypical way. Apparently, the typical wife also fails to realize that her self-image often rests on what she believes her husband thinks of her. The marriage relationship is a topic of ongoing discussions between her and other women. Women want to report to each other on how wonderful their marriages are. He isn't making her feel good, and she can't report to her friends the joys of her marriage. If her negativity intensifies, she's in danger of becoming even more belligerent and contemptuous. And then he quotes Proverbs 21:19. It's better to live in a desert land than with a contentious and vexing woman. I hate all of these stereotypes. I hate them. And then in another chapter he goes on about how women naturally know how to be mothers and need to instruct the men how to parent because apparently it's not instinctual to men, but it is to women. I hate all that rubbish. To go back to the risk of abuse and domestic violence things, there's a few parts in particular that really, really worry me. And as we've seen, Emerson keeps saying things like, oh, but you won't be abused if he's a good man. So surely he'd call out domestic violence when he sees it and actually protect victims, right? No, he does not. He shares this story of a man who was physically abusive to his wife and only changed his ways, apparently, after he was arrested. On a Saturday evening, I threw a dish in anger that hit my wife in the face and left a small cut. She called the police and I was handcuffed and taken off to jail. A magistrate thought it would be best for me to sit out the weekend there and held me over on a lot of bond. I wouldn't pay it. Then the man had to go to court-mandated domestic violence counselling, and then he had an epiphany that all this time I'd been so totally wrapped up in my own needs to demand respect, to be right at any cost, to win a petty argument. This hurt our priceless relationship. I'd been so caught up in the words that I had totally missed her heart, her need. And why is Emerson sharing this story? Well, he says, there are many reasons I like this man's story, but perhaps best of all is that the wife was the first one to contact us when she ordered our resources to learn more about unconditionally respecting her husband. Apparently, the wife requested materials about learning to respect her husband because, and I quote, she was mightily convicted about my need for learning this vital aspect of my wifely role. Right. So, man throws plate at wife and cuts her. Man gets arrested, and she is the one being like, how do I fix this by respecting him more? Teach me the ways to make him not hit me, please. And Emerson's like, good on her. This is what you women need to be doing. She's a shining example. We like this story. This is literally a victim of domestic violence, and he's commending her for blaming herself for what happened. And using this as an example to be like, other women, you do the same. And this isn't a one-off either. In chapter 6, Emerson opens telling the story of a woman who's been married for 38 years. Her husband had an affair and was an alcoholic. Obviously, the wife was like, I don't respect him anymore. And I don't blame her. I don't know why she was still with him, to be honest. But Emerson's response is that her feelings don't actually matter in this situation. This isn't really about feelings, he writes. It's about how wives can help control the crazy cycle by doing what the scriptures teach. Peter calls wives to respectful and chaste behaviour in order to win husbands or being disobedient to God's word. At this point, a wife faces two basic choices. She can try to make more personal adjustments and treat her husband respectfully according to what scripture says, or she can continue with a sour look and a negative, disrespectful attitude. So here's a man who cheated on his wife and has a whole host of other problems, and apparently it's the woman's job to fix this and bring him back to God by making personal adjustments, otherwise she's labelled sour and disrespectful. Trust me, you're not doing anything wrong if you're mad with someone for cheating on you. Not at all. Apparently he told the wife to act respectfully towards her husband even if she didn't feel it, and she was like, won't that make me a hypocrite? And he said, I understand why a wife would feel hypocritical about respecting a man who has been treating her badly, but to continue with disrespect only means shooting herself in both feet, because now they feel disrespected for who they are. I'm sorry, but like, if you don't respect a man because he cheated on you, then yeah, you are being disrespectful because of who he is, and he deserves it. That's not shooting yourself in the foot, that's looking out for yourself. If who you are is someone who throws plates at women, hurts women, cheats on women, abuses women, then yeah, You deserve to be respected for who you are. Many a wife is so beaten down by the unloving harshness of her husband that she simply has no hope. She's tried to forgive him again and again, and he only gets worse. Getting in his face, disrespecting him, seems to be the only way she can survive at all. She would like to stop the crazy cycle, but she'll forgive him when he asks for her forgiveness, not before. The problem here is that few husbands will ask for forgiveness, particularly if the wife keeps going with her disrespect. I freely admit that it's not really fair to ask wives to forgive their unloving husbands, but this isn't about fairness, it's about touching his spirit. Possibly God will touch him as well. The wife may have been mistreated, but she can influence the situation to take a new course. Can she overlook another unloving remark or thoughtless act? He seems far more willing to forgive men's issues than women's, you know? Women should always forgive. Women should make this first move. Women should change. Women should do this and this and this. Men ideally should forgive, but if they can't, well, that's understandable. They're just being men, right? If a man hits you, you forgive him, you respect him, you bring him back to God. But when a woman does it, I get why you kind of bit off with her. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah, she should change. She should. There's just so much of this too. Here's another story of a woman whose husband had an affair. There's a lot of these in this book. My problem is this. I was getting really fired up about changing the way I treat and motivate my husband, but my husband stopped me dead in my tracks with news that he's having an affair and has been thinking of leaving me. My world is shattered. He's unsure if he loves me, and he's unready to decide which direction he's going. So, this story opens up with the wife blaming herself for his affair. With her saying things like, he cheated because I was getting fired up, so I changed the way I motivated him. No, sorry, but he didn't cheat because of anything you did. He cheated because he wanted to. If he was unhappy, he could have spoken to you about it, he could have left, he could have done many things. His choice to cheat was his alone, not anything you did. You didn't make him cheat. But Emerson doesn't think that. Emerson responds by telling her she needs to win him back and it's her responsibility. So then she responds to him again. I listened hard to what you said to me. I listened even harder to what the Lord was saying too. I spent months on my knees just getting through it all. My heart changed. I would pray daily, really search my mind for one thing to respect about my husband. You gave me ideas and places to start, so that is where I started. As we progressed in counselling, he did his part to reassure me she was gone and there was no further contact between them. I am finally seeing in me the wife I always wanted to be. And Emerson says, she realises that while he had logs in his eyes, she had her own to contend with. There's so much victim blaming going on, it is insane. He's literally saying, yeah, he cheated and wanted to leave you, but you're a bitch too because reasons. You probably are. You caused him to cheat, right? None of this actually says what this wife supposedly did wrong, how she drove him to cheat. There's nothing there. But Emerson's just like, yeah, it was her fault. He wouldn't have done it if she wasn't, if she was a better wife. It's disgusting, it's victim blaming, it's not okay. Now, the rest of the book is focused on specific advice for how men can be loving to their wives and how they can show love using the acronym COUPLE, and how women can show respect to their husbands by using the acronym CHAIRS. COUPLE stands for closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking, loyalty, and esteem. And for women to be respectful, they need conquest, hierarchy, authority, insight, relationship, and sexuality. And at this point, I actually think this is a good place to end this video because I've been talking for a very, very long time and I don't want to overwhelm you guys. We still have most of this book to look at, to be fair, because these are the bits that get into the specifics about how to love your husband, how to respect them. And so we're going to kind of like deep dive into these. And I'm going to make this a part 2 to this video, I think, because I've been talking a long time and I'm a little bit tired. And so I assume you guys will be watching too. And this is going to make editing a little easier for me as well. So if you'd like to see part 2, in which we're going to be going through this, like, what does closeness mean? What does insight mean? All this sort of thing. Please subscribe because I make more videos all the time and I'll be putting part 2 out as soon as I can. You can also go follow me over on Instagram. I always post on there on my stories about when new videos are out and stuff like that, so you can keep up to date with things like that. You can also see my dog Kyra on there. She's very cute. And you can also see things like videos of my poetry performances and all sorts of stuff like that that I do for fun. So yeah, thank you for watching today. Let me know your thoughts on this video so far down in the comments, but just be aware we're going to be kind of exploring his definitions of love and respect in a bit more detail in the next part, so just bear that in mind. But for now, let me know your thoughts and where they're at, and just know that there's going to be more coming soon. But for now, thank you so much for watching, thank you for your time, and I'll see you again really, really soon.